Hello again, welcome to the Memoir channel. My name is Nikki Smart, and today I'm going to be speaking with Mary Beth O'Connor about her memoir, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. So yes, this is Judge O'Connor writing her first memoir, and boy oh boy, I feel like it should come with a trigger warning because holy shit sticks, it is pretty damn intense. She has been through some really awful stuff. So this book is about, her traumatic childhood and then how she became addicted to really heavy drugs as a young adult, teenager, young adult, and then finally managing to get herself into rehab and recovery in her early 30s and going on to become a federal judge. So it's truly an amazing story of triumph over enormous difficulties. So let's go speak to Mary Beth and find out a little bit more. Hi, Mary Beth. Welcome to the Memoir channel.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Wow, I just was finishing your book today, and I mean, and just like you see, it's left me speechless. I have, I have no words. And I was saying, I feel like it should almost come with a trigger warning because it is heavy. I mean, you have been through some really traumatic stuff. So, let me ask you first. I mean, maybe you can just give a brief sort of overview of what your book is actually about.
Yeah, and I will say on the trigger warning side, I did try to break it up, like, have
Yeah.
chapters in between that were more neutral so readers can get a breath, right? Because you don't want bam, 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 it just never ends. But the scope of the book, and I really thought hard about the structure of the book.
Hmm.
So the first third approximately is about my childhood and sort of what led up to me using drugs at such an excessive pace at such a young age. Because I really feel like a lot of memoirs, they sort of don't show the context. They jump into the crazy stories and the harrowing drug times. And so I really wanted to show why that made sense to me, but also because it is so common that there is a trauma history, an abuse history in the background of teenage drug addiction. And then I do have the usual stories of the chaos of using, but then a third of the book is my first 3 years of recovery.
Hmm.
Because again, I feel like some memoirs at the end, it's like I went to a couple meetings and everything was great. And it's like, well, that's not how recovery works, And so I wanted to really show sort of a more realistic example and also how I built an individual plan that worked for me and the interplay between trauma recovery and substance recovery, between mental health recovery and substance recovery, because that too is very common. So I really
Hmm.
did think hard about what I wanted the arc of the book to be.
Yeah. No, I think you did a really, really good job, and you're very good at um, like it's not told with a lot of emotion. You're very sort of it comes across very neutral and it's just sort of this is what happened, and there's no anger and resentment, and if there is, it's quite controlled. It's quite controlled, and you're trying to see it from a broader perspective and give a very well-rounded view of this. This is what happened, and because this, and then this, and yeah, and I think you managed that very well.
Yeah, I really did try to do that. Not as they say, don't make it sort of a revenge memoir. I mean, I tried to really be fair to my mother, to really
Hmm.
be as fair as I could to my stepfather, but also to reflect, right? I mean, one of the differences between memoir and a novel, I mean, the memoir should be written immersively like a novel, but there should be that, standing back a little bit. And what did this mean at the
Hmm.
time? How do I see it now? How did this play out in my life? And so I did really try hard to get those aspects into the book.
Yeah. Now, how long did it take you to write this?
So I will say, so I started thinking about it when I was appointed a federal judge in 2014. And because I thought, I was shooting meth at 17 and I didn't get sober
I
till
know.
32, right? It wasn't for
Yeah.
5 minutes, it was a long haul. And then at 20 years sobriety, I was appointed a federal judge. And so I really thought, could this story be of use? Is this a story that I could use sort of as an education tool or as a sign of hope for people that are
Hmm.
struggling? To try to reduce stigma, all those things. And so I started taking my first notes when I was appointed a judge in 2014. But I was a new judge and I had a life. So it was really a hobby. I never knew for sure if I was going to finish it. I certainly didn't have all the skills I needed to write a good memoir. So I
Right.
was, realistic. I'm a great legal writer, but I didn't know how to write in this style. And so I took memoir writing classes. I took classes how to write a good scene, how to do dialogue. I went to writers' conferences, but it was all as a hobby. And then when I retired early in 2020, I was probably 80% done with the book at that point, and then I finished it up in the next about a year and a half, and I started looking for an agent. So from the day I took the first note until I considered it done enough to look for an agent was almost 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, were you worried that when it come out, it would, hurt your reputation in any way? Or did you not think about that might be an issue? I don't know.
Well, I will say, the reality is that a lot of people aren't open about the recovery for professional reasons, right? You have valid concerns about the professional impact. And certainly, if I would have finished it when I was still a judge, I would have thought about whether I should try to get it published when I was still working, because I wouldn't have wanted it to be a distraction from my job. I wouldn't want it to
Mhm.
interfere with my ability to do my job well.
Was it difficult for you to write when you had to sort of revisit those really traumatic moments?
I mean, so when I was in early recovery, I did a lot of therapy. I mean, it actually took me longer to get my trauma history, which I always knew was underneath my drug use. I always knew that the pain of that was underneath, but I didn't know that I had PTSD. Which finally, when I went into therapy with someone with expertise in trauma, she, to my surprise, but correctly diagnosed me, and it showed up as really severe anxiety. And so I had done a lot of therapy. I did individual therapy for the first 3 years of my sobriety. And then I was in a group of women with trauma histories for like another 6 years. So I had done a lot of work. But by the time I was writing the book, there was a gap in time. I hadn't been in therapy for quite a long time. And so it was sort of a fresh eyes revisit and a new emotional experience to go back to those events and process them in a different way. And so
Mhm.
it was challenging sometimes, but in some situations it actually released some emotional angst that I had been holding on to all that time.
Mhm. I mean, it's weird because you don't cry very much in your book. Like, and I'm like, I just feel like, oh my God, I'd be sobbing nonstop. Um, but then I realized that was your way of coping. It was like, I can't show emotion. I can't. And like you said, you would disassociate and just, you weren't actually connected to your body anymore. So that's probably something you had to learn, right? To get back in your body.
Yeah, I mean, when I went into therapy, my therapist would ask me like, "What were you feeling then?" or "What are you feeling now?" And I would look at her like confused. Like she gave me a laminated card of like 20 feelings so that I could look at it and try to pick out which one I was feeling, because that's how disconnected I was. But
Yeah.
also, I had learned at a young age that crying was not only pointless, it was risky because it could increase their anger, their
Um,
aggravation. And so you might get beaten early. I mean, it wasn't that I never cried, but it was rare. And I certainly wouldn't do it in front of my mother or my stepfather if I could help it,
yeah.
because it was dangerous.
Right. I mean, the other thing that it was amazing that you never asked for help, right?
Yeah, because I mean, I knew my mother was useless to me. I mean, I had learned that at an early age, that she wasn't on my side. She wasn't actually even interested in anything. And then when we moved in with my stepfather, I mean, he was beating her.
I just want to let everyone know that we had a bit of a snafu with the internet, so we had to stop our interview and reschedule for another day. So please enjoy part two of the interview with Mary Beth O'Connor.
I mean, asking for help wasn't something I really thought seriously about. I mean, first of all, in most abusive households, there's sort of an underlying message about you don't talk about this outside. But also, the police came to my house multiple times because of my stepfather being my mother, and they didn't do anything. And so it wasn't as if I was getting this message reinforced that the authorities took this seriously or would do anything about it. I mean, they did arrest him once, but that was pretty late in the process, and that was a very severe beating. But prior to that, they would tell him to go cool off, or just separate them for a while. So I definitely didn't have the impression that the adults were going to at all intervene. And if I would have said anything and nothing happened as a consequence, I'm confident that I was aware that this was sort of the environment I was living in.
Yeah. I mean, you actually said something about in the 70s, they didn't take domestic disturbances very seriously. It was like, sort your own stuff out. We're not going to interfere. Yeah.
Right, like it's just a family issue and there's no I mean, don't get me wrong, it's better today, but it's not as if all women get the help or offer of assistance or intervention that they could use from the authorities still, but it is definitely better. And certainly there are things like shelters that didn't exist at the time, not enough shelters, but
Mhm.
at least there's the idea that women might need a safe haven when they leave their abuser.
Yeah. Wow. So now you're actually part of different organizations that help not with that what we were just talking about, but more with getting sober and helping people with that program, specifically because you felt you had a difficult time because you're an atheist and you didn't, So let's talk about that a little bit, and maybe you can explain that better than I can.
Yeah, so I mean, for peer support and one of the, most popular programs, the 12 steps, which is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all of the anonymouses, they have a core concept that you have to believe in a higher power and to whom you're going to turn over your will in your life. Now, they will say it doesn't have to be God. But for me, I wasn't going to turn my will and my life over to anything. And I didn't really believe in any type of higher power. Now I will say that there are atheists and agnostics that make 12 steps work, but there are a lot of religious and spiritual people who choose other alternatives for reasons other than higher power. And so, even in my day, when I got sober in 93, 94, there were alternatives. They were a little harder to find because there was no Google. Okay, like I
Yeah,
had to go to the
yeah,
library and do the research.
yeah.
But today, all that information's online, and I'm on the board for two. I'm on the board for LifeRing Secular Recovery, which focuses on the individual nature of a plan. We believe that your plan and my plan aren't going to be the same. We're different people in different circumstances with different priorities. And we believe in the self empowerment that I'm sort of the decision maker about what should be in my recovery plan. But I am also on the board for She Recovers Foundation, and that does include domestic violence recovery,
Mm.
trauma recovery, mental health recovery, as well as substance use recovery. So it's everything in one place because most of the women and even many men have more than one area that they need to recover from when they're going into substance recovery. There's a really high ratio of trauma leading to substance use disorder and also of untreated mental health. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
overlap. There's overlap in the problems developing, but there's also overlap in the recovery. And so She Recovers is a place where you can talk about that whole picture and not just sort of narrowly your substance use recovery.
No, that's fantastic. So, I mean, I'll put all the links underneath here so people can see that. Um, yeah, I mean, and I'm really proud of you because I feel like, wow, you not only did you do it, you adapted it to suit yourself. I mean, you found a way to make it work, and you did it quite fantastically. One of my questions was going to be, do you think if you didn't have Doc, who I believe is your husband still, right?
Mhm. Yes.
Do you think you wouldn't have done as well? Because I feel like he was a huge part of being able to keep you sort of somewhat in reality.
Well, I mean, it's definitely an advantage, but one of the things that's talked about now are things like, do you have a safe home environment? Do you have support of friends and family? These are all factors that increase your odds of success. I mean, for example, he was ready to throw me out and he was making
Yeah.
no promises for our future, but he did allow me to come home when I left rehab. And so that not everybody has a safe environment where they can go to when they're trying to recover. And
Yeah.
he was keeping his distance at first, but he doesn't create chaos. He wasn't sort of adding to the to the challenges of trying to stay
Mhm.
sober, except for my fear that he wasn't going to he wasn't going to work with me to mend the relationship. And he even started going to couples counseling with me, which was helpful not just for us, but for me getting better at my communication skills and dealing with my verbal aggressiveness and a lot of behaviors that I really needed to improve upon. And so he was an important factor. And it is important for friends and family to their best of their ability. If they can support somebody in recovery, that does help them have a better chance.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, it's kind of amazing because once you have started your drug use, like you said, it kind of stunts your entire development, and you have to kind of go back to that part of you and sort of reparent and relearn and, yeah, reboot, I guess.
Yeah, and for those of us who had abuse in childhood, it's often learning things for the first time. I mean, I wasn't just going back; I was really starting from the beginning in some ways. And I mean, my aggressive behaviors, those were what I grew up with. My mother was like
Right.
that. My stepfather was like that, and so that's how I had been trained. In fact, when I got home from rehab, I made a list of everything I had to work on, and it turned out it wasn't comprehensive, even though I did my best, because I couldn't even see some of the things I needed to work on. They were so normal to me. They were so ingrained that I wasn't even questioning them yet. And
Yeah.
those definitely included like my inability to listen or how I would really react. I would attack somebody verbally or get up in their face if they weren't doing what I wanted, or I felt sort of at all disrespected. And those are behaviors I couldn't even see in the beginning, and you can't work on them until you become aware of them.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And I was really interested about the obsessive compulsive disorder, how that ties into trauma, because I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, I mean, so OCD does have a strong connection with substance use disorder, in particular meth use disorder. And I definitely had OCD-like tendencies when I was a child. I had repetitive behaviors, I had
Mhm.
counting behaviors. I still do it a little bit to some degree. I never blew into full-blown OCD, but those traits definitely were there. And there is a connection, but there's a connection between anxiety and substance use,
Oh,
between depression and substance,
sure.
if it's not treated, right? And so, like, sometimes people say to me, what's the one thing we could do to reduce the addiction rate in America, which has a very high addiction rate compared to the world as a whole? And my answer to that is really mental health treatment for children. Because if we can help them get their mental health conditions resolved when they're young, their odds of developing an addiction later will be significantly reduced.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you about your anxiety levels. How are they today?
Yeah. So I say I'm 92 to 95% recovered from that. And so it's much, much better. I mean, for me, my PTSD, I had some of the normal symptoms like you jump. I mean, I still jump. My husband and I were taking a walk this week, and someone, I don't know, 15 feet away from me sneezed really loudly, and I jumped and grabbed his arm. So I still have some of that. But for me, the most debilitating symptom for my PTSD was very severe anxiety, and I had to work on that. I worked on that for like 9 years in
Wow.
individual therapy, and then I was in group therapy with women with trauma history. So it took me longer to get that under reasonable control than my substance use, and that is actually common because
Mhm.
the PTSD and the anxiety were more complicated, and they really came first, and so it took longer to resolve. But I don't want to scare anybody. It's not like horrible for 9 years and then it's a light switch, right? It's incrementally better, 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 better.
Right.
But yeah, I consider myself mostly recovered from
Right.
that.
But I mean, I like the way you even said it in the book. You said it's not like you just have like 3 months and boom, I'm ready to go. No, it's a sort of a
Yeah.
lifelong process, and to keep checking in and keep coming back to center, and it's okay. And you learn more and more and more as you go. And that's, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say for me, one of the big things I needed to learn was that even when bad things happen, because in normal life, things happen,
Mhm.
tragedies happen, challenges happen. What I needed to learn was that I would be able to handle it. I don't mean like handle it without pain or without struggle, but that I would get through it, because so I didn't need to be as fearful of sort of normal life challenges as I was, because
Mhm.
I would be able to work my way through. And that was something I didn't know, and I had to learn.
Yeah. Wow. Could you maybe read us a part from your memoir?
Sure, I'll read the starting from the beginning.
Okay. I'm going to put you on
Um,
full screen. I'm going to give the whole thing to you.
all right, so the chapter is entitled My First Shot, and this is page 1. When I graduated from my New Jersey high school in 1979, I was an honor student and a junkie. I don't mean I smoked a lot of weed or popped too many pills. I shot speed daily. Methamphetamine to the chemist, crank in my hometown, crystal in modern terminology. I hit a nerve in my right wrist as I injected before the ceremony. When the principal presented my diploma and shook my hand, I bit my lip to suppress the scream that surged from my belly to my throat. Inside the leatherette cover One note congratulated me for winning the most scholarship money, but another demanded repayment of $62 from a candy sale, funds I had used to score a gram of meth. My classmates avoided eye contact when I staggered off the stage. They giggled and prodded one another, excited to launch the next chapter in their lives. I slumped in the plastic chair, dread suffocating me as I contemplated flunking out of college. I almost failed last semester, skipping school so often, and UCLA is going to be so much harder. Maybe I'll get lucky and die of an overdose on a dorm floor. I snapped the folio shut. Jesus, is that my best option? How the fuck did I get here?
Yeah, there were so many moments in your memoir where, I mean, the one where you're on the phone to your mother and you're busy being molested, and it's just so heartbreaking. Oh my God. So, I mean, yeah, I know you've really been through
Yeah.
it.
And it's interesting because when I wrote that, it really reinforced to me, where I like how deeply I knew I couldn't turn to a parent, that it didn't even occur to me to tell her as
Mm.
I'm literally being assaulted while I'm on the phone with her. And so it just to me was an indicator of the sort of the depth of my understanding that my mother wasn't going to be there for me no matter what happened.
Yeah. No, heavy stuff. And I mean, like I said, I'm really proud of you because I feel like I don't know what the statistics are of people that manage to pull themselves out and how many people don't. I have no idea if such a statistic even exists. But
Well, I do know that for substances, sometimes we hear this data like only 5% of people, succeed in treatment or 15% or whatever sort of the low ball number is. But the good news is that that's really a number based on each effort in their lifetime. About 75% of the people who qualify under the standard for having an addiction will eventually get to the point where they no longer meet that criteria. And so I think the data is a little more optimistic than people realize. The other thing is that
good.
once people get five years of continuous sobriety, they have an 85% chance of never having another relapse. And so longevity actually really does reinforce your recovery and make your odds of slipping much less likely. I mean, 1 in 7 still might have a future problem. It's not insignificant, but I don't think people realize that it's an 85% success rate by 5 years.
Okay, well that is good to know. That's quite hopeful. Yes, indeed. Okay, so let me ask you this too. Now that you've finished your book and you've got it out there, and how long has it been out already?
It came out in January of 2023.
Okay, so it's been. Are you working on anything else now?
So I don't think, although never say never, I'll write another book. I mean, that's a massive undertaking. But
Mhm.
I have had opinion pieces out, like in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times and Recovery Today and others. And I do plan to do more of those. I haven't had much time in the last year, but I plan to pick that up more again. But also a lot of it for me is about the speaking and educating, and advocacy. So I'll keep my
Mhm.
2 board positions. I have a bunch of different trainings I do, like at workshops or conferences, or I'll do a keynote for a fundraiser for like a recovery organization that I support. And then I train lawyers and judges. I do, and even like medical professionals. I do a continuing legal education training I created around substance use. So part of it, the goal is really what can I do to educate? What can I do to inform? What can I do to sort of reduce stigma and increase understanding? And that's sort of the area that I've carved out for myself that I will
Mhm.
hopefully continue in.
Yeah, well, I wish you all the very best with that. And I mean, I love that you're doing that. Thank you for doing that. Uh, and I'm glad that we finally managed to get this interview done. So, yay. And I will put all the links. And if there's anything else you would like to let people know, or if there's anything you want added in, just let me know. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the one thing I'll say is that, if anyone's interested in substance use and recovery topics, I do post a lot of information on Twitter, and I emphasize information. I don't argue with people, but if you're interested, like in the new studies that come out or articles, I'm at MaryBethO_. And then people can always message me through my website, which is junkie2judge.com. If people have questions or they're looking for resources or they have speaking opportunities, I answer all my emails. Or if you want to
Okay.
talk about anything related to memoir writing and marketing, which is the big challenge, right? Happy to answer those memoir related questions as well.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll put all of that underneath here so that people can see it. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. And yeah, I wish you all the best. And I really enjoyed reading your book and then speaking to you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great.
It's my pleasure. All right. Bye bye.